I'm joined with Jeff King, son of Fred King, one of the icons of CKRM. Jeff, just a little bit about, I guess, first of all, when your dad first started at 620 CKRM, it was 980 CKRM at the time. Mm-hmm. What did he ever tell you about his start here?
I mean, I remember it well. We moved from Ontario, from Thunder Bay to Regina for my dad to take the job. George Gallagher had reached out, and I mean, I think it was a big move for our family. We were deeply rooted in Ontario, and we were in my mother's hometown of Thunder Bay. My dad was from Kenora, just a few hours away. So a big jump and a big move, and I think it was a little nerve-wracking at the beginning. I don't think that CKRM had the the listenership that they enjoyed for most of my dad's career. So it was it was a new frontier, new challenge, but he was excited to take it on. And, we as a family, started our schooling in Regina. And, it ended up being the best move that my dad ever made for the family.
And it was George Gallagher that not only brought your father, Fred, to CKRM, but a lot of the other giants of the industry. And he really was that catalyst that brought them in. Did you have much interaction with George?
Oh, we sure did. Yeah. I mean, that was back in the day of, George was George and Doreen and the kids. Our family and their family were very close. And, I'm still close to Brett Gallagher today, who lives out here in Victoria, where I live. George was such an intelligent guy. And he used to do, a spot commentary in the mornings, and you could tell just how intelligent George was. But he had a vision for that station, and he started to assemble, in a sports analogy, a pretty good bench. And, my dad was part of it. And, Ed Bain, Willie Cole, Moon Mullen, the list goes on and on, the late Bob Hutton in sports. They had quite the team, and, it didn't take long for that station to take off and become an absolute giant.
And it was basically last place, and that team took it to number one.
Yeah, it was Johnny Sanderson at CKCK. It was Hart Kirsch at CJME. And, my dad came in, and, country was sort of new. The country format was new, and he loved country. I mean, he loved music, period, but he had this passion for country music. And really, in a large way, he had a passion for Canadian country music. He was a musician as well, and actually toured with Freddie McKenna, who was a sit-down blind guitar player who was on Don Messer's Sing-Along Jubilee. And my dad toured with Freddie McKenna for a while, along with my mom as well, who played the snare drum, and my dad played the bass, and Freddie was a guitar player. So my dad had a pretty good grasp of the importance of Canadian influence on the country format. So, he helped advance that. And, along with everything else he did, he was, a huge fan of the CCMA. He was a two-time CCMA Broadcaster of the Year in secondary markets. He is a former president of the Canadian Country Music Association for a term, and posthumously inducted into the Canadian Country Music Association Hall of Fame as a builder. And I was lucky enough to go to Calgary in the early 2000s and accept that on my family's behalf.
And that's one of the things that everybody touches on. In that lineup, Fred was the music element to that. That was his connection with the industry, with the artists, with the music itself. That was really his forefront.
Yeah, he loved it. And, growing up, we were on Hammond Road in the north end of Regina for a lot of years. We had a pool in our backyard. And those days, the bands would play Monday through Saturday at the Pump. The Pump was like an A-list venue for live music, and the big acts from across the country, the Carol Bakers and Eddie Eastmans and Ronnie Prophets, they would play the Pump. And on Sundays, their travel day or their off day, it was a party at the King household. My dad would invite those bands that were on the road and didn't get a home cooked meal, their buses or their vans with the trailers would all pull up in front of our home, and there'd be a jam session in the afternoon, and the bigs in Canadian country music stopping by to jam and have a swim and have a meal at our house. So we had this great connection right from the get-go, and I really think that that fortified as well his love of the Canadian music scene. And when the Flea Market was going, it was always it was always Canadian country music. It'd be a song heading into the beginning of the Flea Market, at the end of the first hour, beginning of the second hour, and the end of the show, and that was always a Canadian song that was played heading into or out of the Flea Market.
Let's talk about the Flea Market. Your father, a couple different hosts, but obviously with Willie Cole, starting with others.
Yeah, it was Moon at first. So Moon Mullen, Ron Mullen, and my dad started the Flea Market. And it was, as my good friend Ed Bain always says, it was ahead of its time. It was edgy. It was, you're hearing things on the radio that most people, just weren't doing at the time, that no one was doing that at the time, and taking callers. And it wasn't about what they were buying or selling. It was about what they had to say, where they were from, their background, their story. They made them the star. They'd add a little, my dad would play the mandolin for birthdays, and they took it to the edge, too far a couple of times, but they took it to the edge, and then they inserted characters, and these were people that worked at the station in different capacities. Miss Dobko was, a reoccurring character, and she was the receptionist at the station. The late, great Les Pavlik, Metro, would pop in and do his thing, and they had Maynard, and they had, all these different characters that would come in and come out, and people it was theater of the mind. Way before a lot of other radio hosts and stations were doing that. It was great theater. It was bringing people from small communities and giving them their 15 minutes of fame, and it was must listen to radio, and that really is what drove that station to the numbers that they enjoyed at that time.
You really touched on it well. It was cutting edge. To say the Flea Market was unique, it absolutely was.
Yeah.
As Willie Cole said, it wasn't a swap shop. It had nothing to do with what they were calling with the items.
No.
It was about theater.
It was theater, and it was fun, and it was, it's the days before the cell phone and 1,000 stations on TV. People at that point, in their cars, their combines, their in a coffee shop in a small town, people would sit and listen to the Flea Market, and probably shush everyone else around while it was on. So it was pretty cool, and it was neat to go out into the community with my dad and see the reaction people had, it brought a lot of joy to people. It brought a lot of happiness, and like I say, it was people stopping what they were doing and listening to the Flea Market. And, after, Moon was, Ed was in there, Ed Bain for a while. And of course, my dad's longest partner and great friend, Willie Cole, they had something special there. And, and then that led into King Country, the band, which my dad had already going when Willie arrived in town. But Willie, accordion player, keyboard player. My dad played bass. My mom was the singer. And, that was just another great part of what was going on in those days, that they would travel to, every small community, and played Regina a lot at Turvey Center or wherever the case may be. And, they went out and shook hands and said hello to the people that were listening to them on the radio, and especially the Flea Market. And it was a really special time for sure.
And many have said that too. Willie Cole has mentioned the fact that band was a huge part of the radio station's success. It wasn't an extension of the radio station technically, but it really was. Jim Smalley said they got listeners one by one with that band.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough at the end, the last few years, to play drums in the band. So I got to see it firsthand. As a younger boy, we didn't travel with the band, but then I had a chance to go and see it firsthand, and the excitement people would have to meet Fred and Willie. In every small town, and shake their hand and get a photo taken. It was something really special, and the music was great. And it was, the band went hand in hand with everything else they did. It each sort of played off each other, and I think was a huge part of the success at that point of CKRM.
And your father in particular, they were never at a distance from the audience. They were always right in with their listeners. They were always a part of those small towns. And they didn't shy away from it. They didn't, become so big that they were better than somebody else. Would you agree that kind of personality was very unique and is still very unique?
Yeah, my dad, and I can say this, with so much confidence, had zero ego. He wasn't the kind of guy to go, hey, I'm a big shot on the radio. He was happy he loved to do what he did, and he loved that radio station, and a big part of that was getting out into the community. And I don't know if that's lost today a little bit, or just times have changed a lot, but whether it was they'd go to the small towns, and along with the band, they'd still a lot of weekends just MC events, Ducks Unlimited, or you name it, they emceed it. My dad and Willie, I'm talking about, and remotes. And they went out there into this province and shook everyone's hand and were gracious and kind. It was neat to see. And
it's come up a few times as well. When did they sleep? When did Fred sleep? Because you nailed it every weekend. Didn't matter if it was an evening function. Didn't matter if it was a day at a fishing derby, whatever. They were there. What was it like at home when he was on the road that much?
Yeah, we went a lot of times. We'd go if they played in Yorkton, for instance, we'd stay at the Holiday Inn, and the Gallagher kids would come and meet us. Our home life was great. My dad was actually a shy, quiet person, away from the radio personality or the musician. He was a quiet guy. He liked to sit quietly and listen to the radio. He would listen when he wasn't on CKRM. He would sit and listen to CKRM hours at a time. But, our home life was great. And, my mom and dad, my mom was as big a part of it as my dad was. But yeah, great childhood. It was that era where everyone knew my dad and everyone smiled when they saw Fred coming along. So it was good. And I think of the weekends, Willie was the one that got up at 4 a.m. My dad did that for a time, but I always wonder how Willie did it, to be quite honest with you. And Willie never missed, one of his son's hockey games, or he'd get home at 3, 4 in the morning from playing on the road, and he'd be up at an hour and a half later to go see a hockey game. But yeah, our home life was great. And of course we had King Country, the store as well, and the Northgate Mall for many years. So we spent a lot of times hanging around the Northgate Mall with my parents. But, we didn't know any different. We just, we didn't know that, Fred, our dad, was, a big time radio star. He was just Fred, our dad.
Now, a special relationship you mentioned between Willie and your dad. Your dad was programming CKRM, but then turned that over to Willie.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of, I guess, respect, knowledge to say, you know what, you take the reins on this.
Yeah, and Brad, I'll be honest with you, I think he was happy to do it. I don't think that was his calling. And it's funny, you look at some, I get the chance to work with Ed Bain now every day, one of the greatest talents in our country. Ed programmed for a bit, and he knew that wasn't his thing. He was a radio host and a radio personality. And I think, my dad back in the day knew the same thing, that he wasn't, his forte was not being a program director and a programmer. His forte was being an on-air personality. And yeah, he never, he never regretted that decision. He never, he thought Willie was a great programmer. My dad had no bitterness ever at the industry and was always happy at whatever sort of way it flowed. So he was a non-ego guy. So I think when it came to handing the reins of programming to Willie, he was like, yeah, you know what? You'll be great at this.
Now, I'm interested to know, you're a broadcaster. How does that happen? Was it purely your dad? Was it a combination of the people, those personalities you met? How did that become your road?
Well, I'm often asked how I got into broadcasting, and I always say nepotism. But you know what? It was Willie. It was I was at that point an electrician out of high school and playing weekends with King Country. And I had a great relationship with Willie, and a lot of it was our love together of hockey. And we could talk for hours about hockey. And, Willie was a really close family friend as well. And a position came open to become the producer of Lauren Harrison's talk show and the Flea Market, and then wind carts and fill in here and there on the air. So Willie gave me that opportunity, and I ran with it, with sort of over my head hanging, which I was proud of, that you're Fred King's son. And I remember someone coming to me that worked in the Regina market and showed me their business card. They were doing the morning show at CKCK and said to me, you should get a business card made too that says Fred King's son. And I was like, wow. So, after 2 years in Regina, I thought, yeah, you know what? I need to go and get out on my own. So I moved out to Victoria and tried to fend for myself. But of course, it was that great rooted knowledge through Moon. And, I've known Ed. Ed took me to a Saskatchewan Rough Rider football game when I was about 10 years old. And so I've known Ed forever and in awe of, like I say, Moon, Willie, of course, and Ed, and Bob Hutton was always so great to me, and Manfred Jonick, Perry Nias. Perry was another guy that has a big impact on my career. So kind, and I just thought Perry was. I thought my dad was a talent, but I thought Perry was this huge talent, and I just, before the interview started, had a chance to say a quick hi to Colin Lovequist, another guy that I remember well from those days. So yeah, I was lucky to be immersed in this great pool of knowledge and broadcasters and wonderful people, including, like I say, George Gallagher and the Gallagher family for sure.
I fully understand what you're saying. It was an atmosphere of fun. It wasn't a heavy-handed atmosphere. The station was very light in the studio, very light in the hallways. There was a lot of fun going on.
Yeah, there was a lot of laughter. And my dad used to love that. He used to love the laughter in the hallways. And he would say to me, like, if you've got that laughter, if you've got people that aren't on air, that are laughing and hanging out together that way, you've got something special. And we would, the Rowdy Gang, that used to be like a staple for Buffalo days back in that era. And they would come in and, that was the era, Brad, of, my dad loved to smoke, and, they're smoking, doing the flea market. And he was just at home. He was at home in that flea studio. He was at home on the air. He did the request show during the lunch hour. And he loved taking the calls and loved to talk to the people. And we used to, we lived at Regina Beach for years, and we became great friends with the Hutterites. And we go to the Arm River Hutterite colony all the time. And, in some ways they weren't supposed to have the radios, but they were all hidden out in the barns. And the Hutterites became great friends of my dad, and he just embraced every single bit of it and had the time of his life. And, at the end, when it all ended, when he walked away, he was satisfied. He was like, he said to me, because I was like, Dad, you must miss this. And he was like, if I never speak into a microphone again, I'm fine. I had a great run. I enjoyed every second of it. He left nothing on the table. He enjoyed it. Had lots of laughs. Willie and my dad, the laughs they've had together and the stories that they probably can't tell are as big as the stories they can tell.
What would you like to tell the people of Saskatchewan about your dad now that CKRM's hit 100 years and he's being honored as one of the icons of the station?
Well, he loved it. That's the biggest thing I could say. He loved it. He loved Saskatchewan. When once we moved there and settled in, and it became our home, he loved it. He embraced it. He loved the people. He absolutely loved the people, and he put himself out there to the people. You didn't have to do the things that my dad and Willie did. You didn't have to do remotes all the time. You didn't have to be in the band and own a country and western store and travel on the weekends and play and drive home at 2 or 3 a.m. He didn't have to do any of that, but he loved every second of it, and he loved that radio station. He loved CKRM and loved country music. And in his retirement years, his first, he didn't live long after he retired, but his couple of years that he lived, he had no greater days than he would sit with his dog Little on his shoulders, and he would have a smoke, and he'd listen to Perry Nice in the afternoon, and he loved it. He loved listening to Colin. He loved listening to Perry. He loved it as much as when he was there, when he was gone. So, I would say thanks to everyone. It was great for our entire family, and I'm so honored that my dad's being honored.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for sharing Fred King with us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Brad.
Ed Bain joins me now to talk about Fred King. Ed, tell me, first of all, a little bit, when did you arrive at CKRM?
So I got there in about this time of the year, February in '76. They were just on the verge of celebrating the 50th anniversary of RM at that time.
And Fred was the one that brought you there, or someone else?
Yeah, Fred did brought. Well, so Moon Mullen had worked with Fred on the Flea Market, and Moon had decided to, I think, actually get out of the business at that point. So I was doing a little bit of this swap and shop kind of stuff down in Weyburn. I had just really started about a year and a half in radio as it was. And I was doing, I was kind of dabbling in sort of, getting the feel of talking to the callers a little bit more than just a regular swap and shop show. And so I kind of had a feel for a little bit of what the flea market was like. And then a friend of mine who was working at RM at the time recommended me, and Fred gave me a call after Fred's wife Patty had done the initial listen to see if I got the Patty approval, then it was a foot in the door for Fred. So he phoned me and he said he was looking for a partner for the flea market, and I remember I said to him, I'm the guy you need for that. And then I instantly thought, why would I say that? It just sounds so egotistical to say that. And I thought, I've blown my chance here. And it turned out he kind of liked that confidence. And so the rest was history. I started, I think, about a month later.
Now, you touched on it, and many other people have touched on it, the fact that it was not a swap shop. It was something very unique. It was about the caller, not about the item. And you brought that with you, right?
Well, a little bit. I mean, I was so green. I was really, really young. I was 20 years old at that time. Fred, I think, was 43. So I had, minimal experience in terms of being a personality and trying to get a handle on that. Those guys, Fred and Moon, were the masters at that, and had a great following there. And the show was really edgy and something that I didn't really have any real feeling as to how to be a part of that initially. It took me a while to get it figured out and loosen up and learn how to have fun on that show. I was pretty nervous for the opening part, but you're right. It was never about the items. Always about getting what you could out of the callers.
And how long were you doing that?
So I did that for. So in total, I was at RM for 5 years at RM. So I did the flea market, I think, for 2 or maybe 3. And then what had happened there? Moon decided to come back, I think. Was that how that went? Yeah, Moon had wanted to come back. And there was an opening in the drive slot. And so I moved to afternoon drive at that point. And then Moon left again to go to Saskatoon. And that's when Willie came in.
Okay,
so I think in total I might have had 2 or 3 years max there on the flea market.
Okay, so tell us about Fred King and your experience. As you said, 20 years old, going into that studio with him. Tell us about Fred.
Well, he was a great guy. We had a good meeting when I first started there, and I remember he took me over to the curling club. We had toast and coffee, and we talked about just life, and he asked me about country music, and I said I really don't know country music at all, and I didn't at that point. I was 20 years old. I was into rock and roll, and that was kind of my deal. But at that time at the station I was working at in Weyburn CFSL, they had just moved to sort of a middle of the road format, so I was playing some pretty safe, kind of quiet, middle of the road type of stuff. So the country music actually was, for me, really a nice change. Stuff had, it had some life to it. So I was into that. It was great. But Fred was intimidating just because of who he was, not because he was an intimidating type of person, but he was 43. He was a legendary guy, great big voice, a real country music knowledge. Lived the country music lifestyle. Had the boots, had the Western suits, looked great, and so I was pretty nervous initially. But when I first started, I think maybe the first or second day, he signed the show off by saying, "We'll be back tomorrow, and Ed will be funnier." So that's the kind of pressure I was sort of under in the early week or the first week.
Now, what kind of things did you learn from Fred?
Well, I think I learned that, you need to be honest about whatever you're doing. Fred was really into, talking about any kind of personal stuff that was going on in your life. And I, really wasn't all that comfortable. I was sort of caught in that early radio phase of where, everything is just kind of superficial, and you do your intros and extras, and there's no real life experience stories to share, because that just kind of wasn't done. But he was ahead of his game in terms of opening up and talking about what you're doing, who you are, just really kind of digging into your personality and releasing you of any kind of fear of that. So I learned from him how to not be afraid to let people into my life a little bit and find out what I was about, even though I had, not a lot of life experience at that point.
Do you think that style is how he got such good callers. He got right into the heads of the callers and really got stuff out of them that, people were shocked that they were even saying it out on the radio.
Yeah, he was just naturally interested in people and what their lives are all about, what they're doing. And so you're right, he was very good at digging into to the callers' lives and, just working his way to find some gold, and he always did. And I always thought that was just such a great gift. I wasn't as curious as he was. I had to kind of learn to be a better listener and learn how to get the most out of the callers from him. But he was the master. He just had a natural ability to do that.
What were some of the other personalities that you were working with for that time that you were there?
Well, when I was there, Paul Revere was there. Paul was doing the midday show, so he was another big talent from Thunder Bay. Had a big voice and just a great music knowledge. He had just a vast collection of music albums, and he really knew his stuff. So he was, another big talent there. Greg Cotta, which was more my age, and him and I kind of hung around a little bit together. He was doing Afternoon Drive, and he was really a kind of a rock jock radio guy in terms of the fundamentals of radio. He was more into that kind of production and slickness, if you will, which you didn't really hear much of on country radio at the time. It was more sort of folksy, if you will. But he was into the kind of the top 40 production of it, and I was as well. I kind of liked that. So he was there. We had Jim Brock in the newsroom, big voice, and Jim. Bob Hutton was the sports director, and he did the morning sports and the afternoon sports, I think, at that time as well. And he was just a huge talent, big voice, big curling knowledge with Bob, but he was a professional through and through, and I really liked Bob. He was a great guy, too.
Now, at that time, and your time there was kind of the start of that sound, that creation, and you mentioned Willie Cole coming. Did you have an idea that there was something special being built there?
Well, I did, because it was so big right out of the gate. I hadn't worked at a station. I'd only been in radio about a year and a half. I was really too green, I think, to get that job. I was very lucky to get that. So it was the real deal when I got there. I mean, there was billboard advertising. There was big jingles, and of course they were promoting that 50th anniversary party that was coming up, I think, in about a month from the time that I started. Matter of fact, kind of a funny story about that, just to give you an idea of how Fred is able to get you to do things or get things out of you. So right away when I moved there and that party was coming up, he started working on getting me a date for that big night. So that became kind of a theme on the flea market there for a couple of days. And some lady actually phoned me after the show one day, and she said, my daughter works down at the Royal Bank on Inductee. Why don't you just go down here and take a look and see what you think? So I did, and I met this girl, and I took her to that 50th anniversary party. Crazy.
Give us a special memory of your time with Fred, either on the air or off the air.
Well, we did a lot of remotes together, so there was a lot of rodeos that we attended. I'm just trying to think of we had a pretty good time one time up in Kennedy. I remember I got the giggles. He was, he had that Bob Hope look sometimes when he would crack a joke and then just give you that sort of, that sideways Bob Hope type of look. And he used to just crack me up. And I remember laughing so hard during a remote one time that I just couldn't get my composure back, and he had to just kind of, take it from there. But he was a special friend. The whole family were very good to me. I spent a lot of time at their house, socially, and Fred was always in my camp. Anytime I had sort of even, some trouble in terms of anything going on in my life, I went to him. He was a bit of a father figure to me. So he'll always have a special place in my heart for sure. And his wife, Patty, the late Patty, was terrific as well.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Just that it was a wonderful place to be. I feel so lucky to have landed there. Because it was just a great training ground to become a full personality. I mean, you got the you got to do things right out of the gate. I mean, when I started, next thing I know, 3 days later, I'm at the pump hosting a live show, which I'd never done before. My first remote, I'd never done a live remote before. So it was a real education in what it takes to be a part of a community and a part of a family, of a radio station that really pulled together as a whole unit. And so that would be my memory, is just how much of a great experience, a great learning experience it was, and just how lucky I was to be there.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Brad.